posterity's sake.
Excellent. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and start. So we'll
Okay.
call this April 4th meeting of the Tree Commission to order. Our first item on our agenda tonight is approval of the March minutes. Somebody would like to make a motion?
This is Donna. I moved, we accept the minutes.
Second?
Second.
Jean seconds, and we've moved to accept the March minutes. Any discussion? Tim? Okay, and then a vote to approve the March minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All not in favor? And we've moved to approve the minutes for March. Thank you. Steve, next we have staff report.
Yeah. All right, so the update RFP for the downtown tree management plan for Susan and Tyler. This was a plan kind of written for or I guess it was a request for proposal for a long-term management of the trees on the downtown mall. And this would include kind of how we manage maintenance and removals and plantings going forward. The trees are about, almost 50 years old, and there's going to need to be, we're going to need to be able to work on them if we need to. So the RFP was pretty much sent out for consultants to bid on, and that was quite a process. But at any rate, so that's out, and we are actually accepting bids. Plan for the wood products that were generated from the downtown mall work. Everything has been donated to UVA Sawmill Group and the Downtown Business Association. And there is sawing going on, I guess, this week. They kind of decided on a certain width, thickness that they wanted the boards, and been determined that they're just gonna, got a weird echo on my computer, sorry. It's been determined that they're just gonna build 1 or 2 prototype benches and see what the city thinks and go from there. But as I've reminded them, it's actually the wood does not belong to the city anymore. So I think they're on the hook for a couple of benches, and they would like to make more, but I don't know how much city government really has interest in it. So I don't know what's going to happen. But they're definitely on the hook for a couple of benches, and they're working on that. And as far as the tree planting goes for the spring, it started this week. The contractors are moving right along. Since it's spring break at all the schools, they are concentrating efforts on schools, so there'll be lots of disturbance when it gets back in session. And it would be great if they finished all of them, but I kind of doubt they will. But
Right.
Anyway, that's what I have.
Steve, are there's still plans to do some work on the stumps that have been left on the downtown mall?
There is, but I have not gotten clearance for that, and I've kind of lost track of the one guy that I could talk into trying something. It would have to be a designated day, and he would have to have protective fencing around him.
Right.
But at any rate, I'm hoping for at least 1 or 2. And one of the ideas we were talking about was kind of themes of the downtown mall.
Mm-hmm.
So at the very least, I'm hoping for to carve an instrument or 2, or maybe a book or a cup of coffee. Easier ideas, kind of not too terribly intricate, that could probably be done. But we are open for suggestions.
Okay. Thank you. Donna?
Just a question about, I know the RFP is out. Do we have a deadline, but when it's due back?
I think it was this week, actually.
Oh, okay, great.
Because I don't know for sure, but I was asked for an extension, so I'm guessing it was this week.
Do you have
Steve,
that?
Steve, was that publicly available somewhere on city's website?
Yes.
Should have been. I can email it to you if you like, but as far as I know, it was accessible, but I wouldn't know where to look for it.
Yeah, I think I've seen
Yeah,
it posted, Jeff.
do you know where? Do you know where?
Um,
Off the top.
Good question. Maybe James knows where those things get posted.
Yeah, Steve, if you could set, maybe just send it to the entire commission if you're gonna send an email, just so anybody
Sure.
curious. If we can't find where it is.
So there's a, I
Should
think it's
be,
called charlottesville.gov bids.
yeah,
.aspx, which
Okay.
is the bid page, and it's requests for proposals. There's third one down, downtown mall tree management plan status open, closes 4/17/2023 at 2 p.m. So you've got a
Okay,
little bit
cool.
of time.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's more time.
Good deal.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, shit. Hold on one second.
Excuse me,
You guys
Chris.
can go, I think my section's done. My phone just, anyway,
Yeah,
move
yeah,
on.
yeah. But blew up.
I just posted the link to the bid page in the chat for those who are interested.
Awesome. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next item on the agenda is the introduction of new tree commissioners. So we have the great pleasure of having two of them with us tonight, I think. I don't see JD Brown, but Susan McKinnon is here and Tyler Miller. So thank you all for putting in your applications and being accepted by City Council to serve on the Tree Commission. It's great to have you on board. Traditionally, people say something short about their bio or what they're interested in doing while on the Tree Commission. If you're comfortable, feel free to do that now. Susan, I can call on you first.
Sure. I'm really happy to be on this committee. So I am a cultural anthropologist, and I taught it in the Department of Anthropology at UVA for 34 years, from 1984 to 2017. And really only two aspects of my work at UVA are relevant to this committee. One was that I was on the Landscape and Arboretum Committee at the university, which is a committee that reviews all the design, landscape designs and tree removals that happen at the university. And they've got a considerable endowment to support the work of implementing landscape designs across the university. The other piece that might be relevant to this committee, I don't know, is that I have a fair amount of experience writing grants and taught grant writing to grad students for many years. So if there are any grant writing efforts in this committee, I'd be happy to be part of that. Kind of more immediately, my interest in these issues were instigated from living on about an acre of land that goes down to the river on the city side of Charlottesville that has had and continues to have a number of issues, including its a steep slope. It has significant stormwater management issues. It has a riverine forest that had been engulfed by practically every invasive possible, and a river buffer that needed to be shored up. And so I've been working on that, and at the same time, I've been sort of watching the tree canopy in Charlottesville decline and various other natural resources be threatened by developments in invasives and the effects of climate change. And all that kind of spurred my interest to kind of take my efforts on my own backyard to another level and join a group like, or at least apply to a group like this that's working on these issues more seriously. I've got a lot of interest and I'm very flexible. Obviously, the preservation and expansion of the tree canopy, the work on invasives, I'd be interested in fostering public-private kind of alliances to accomplish the committee's goals, and also to work on, I think, some of what's going to be talked about today, but the alignment of city policies and codes relating to trees and other natural resources with the goals of the climate change action plan, and also the city report on climate risks and vulnerabilities. Anyhow, I'm really happy to be on this committee, and I'm ready to get to work on all those and many other issues. Thanks.
Fantastic, Susan. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Glad you could be here.
Yeah.
Excellent. Tyler?
Hi, I'm Tyler Miller. I don't have quite the extensive background in trees, but I do love them. I was a musician in a former life. That's what I studied in college. I currently work for Cummins, the engine company. I manage firmware updates to telematic and IoT devices, and something about that just doesn't, there's a big gulf between that and nature. So I feel like getting involved in the community in that way, kind of to fill that gap, mainly is where my interest comes from. I think that, and having a few really important environmental educators in my background, just in terms of my education. A shout out to Patricia Kalatasti, a high school teacher from Blacksburg, Virginia, I think, instilling that interest, lifelong interest. So that's really why I'm here, just to help however I can.
Great. Good teachers. They're formative. Well, awesome. Thank you both for being here, and we'll look for JD Brown, hopefully at the next meeting. Hopefully it's not some technological hiccup. Great. Now Steve is back with us. We now have the presence of James Frias here tonight to talk about all things NDS and others. So I think we can go ahead and begin on that. It's 5:15, so we're running just a little bit early, which is great. Gives us more time for discussion. So James, is there something you want to pull up or a presentation you want to share? You're muted.
Hi. No, I just figured I'd talk.
Great.
But first off, good evening or afternoon. And thank you all for having me today. It's a gorgeous day outside, kind of almost challenging to be in here staring at a computer, but we'll get through it. And of course, Kareem is outside. That's just not fair at all. All things NDS, I think probably the starting point I would imagine would be CVIL plans together and our and the zoning rewrite portion of that work. Just to get to a baseline of familiarity with our work, the CVIL plans together project has been ongoing now since 2020, beginning of 2020. And it was a 3-phase project that included the adoption of an affordable housing strategy, which happened back in March of 2021, and the adoption of a comprehensive plan in November of 2021. And now we are working on the zoning rewrite, the third leg of the program, and the one where we're seeking to implement the policies, goals, objectives laid out in those other 2 plans. Obviously, a big part of this effort over time has been a focus on the issues of housing affordability in the city, the supply of housing, and equity issues around housing, which comes up most significantly in the issue of the distribution of housing choices throughout the city. But that's not the only things the comprehensive plan talks about. The comprehensive plan also talks about our environmental goals for the city, and in particular, addressing both the impacts of climate change and hoping to contribute in any way the city can towards reducing the impacts of climate change going forward. As we go forward with the zoning ordinance, we are boy, where are we? We began this project around this time last year, and last summer, we released a couple of different reports. The first one was a approach and diagnostic report that looked at essentially what were the gaps between our existing regulations, particularly our existing zoning ordinance, and the objectives laid out in the comprehensive plan, and then it proposed how that gap would be filled, what the approach would be towards the new drafting the new zoning ordinance. And that overall pointed us in a number of different directions. It talks about expanding the opportunities for housing, new homes to be developed across the city, and have lots of objectives with regard to clarifying our existing zoning ordinance. For those who've ever looked at our existing zoning ordinance, I always begin by apologizing. It's a very difficult ordinance to look at. The new one is proposed as a vast improvement over that, with much more intuitive layout and lots and lots of illustrations, tables, and so on and so forth. The next document we released back in August dug into the details of our proposed affordable housing requirements, and looked at what we called a rate of change analysis, which was attempting to study particularly looking at those areas that have been identified on the land use map as low intensity and medium intensity. What is the potential rate of change in terms of new development activity in those areas? The important thing to take away from that study is that we're anticipating this to be in neighborhoods to be a very incremental change, in the sense that when you look at the available lots, when you look at the rate at which lots become available for sale, and when you look at the market for development in the city, change is not going to happen rapidly. The analysis was a supply side analysis, which means that it didn't look at the demand side of the equation, didn't look at how many people are moving into the city and what and how that impacts demand. It simply looked at what's the greatest extent of potential development that could happen, leaving aside the demand factor, and that came to a conclusion of around 400 potential units developed on a per year basis, looking at a 3-year time frame. Now that's not number of lots, that's number of units. One of the other findings of that report is many of those units are going to be in townhouse format, because that's believed to be the more popular development type that developers would be interested in building. And so then that takes us forward to production of the zoning ordinance itself and the zoning map. We've been releasing the portions of that work in modules. The first module was the zoning map itself and the district standards that go with that. So all of the things that define what one can do with a piece of property, including the uses allowed, and then significantly the lot standards and the building standards, things like height and massing, things like setback, lot size when you subdivide, lot coverage. And then module 2 has been the development standards. There's a lot of things you'll find in that section of the ordinance, everything from signage and lighting to landscaping standards, which we'll dig into in more depth here, and rules for things like transitions between higher intensity and lower intensity uses, rules for parking, so on and so forth. So a lot in that as well. The next module we will be releasing, module 3, will be coming out at this point, more likely in the second or potentially third week of April. We are working on to get that out as quickly as possible. That module 3 is going to include the administration of the zoning ordinance, basically how the rules of how it's operationalized, enforcement and decision making. We're continuing to get public feedback and comment from our planning commission, city council, various groups within the city. All of that work is being compiled. All of that feedback is being compiled and will result in one consolidated draft that we'll be releasing. We're aiming to be releasing that sometime in the month of May. That'll also be accompanied by a updated map reflecting the feedback we've been getting on map issues. And then it goes to City Council. First it goes to the Planning Commission, and then it goes to City Council. And both entities, if we should say that process includes public hearing and then ultimately adoption by the City Council. So that in, what was that, 2 minutes? It's a picture of Seville plans together. So I'm imagining that this group wants to dig in particular into what's can be found in the landscaping and other aspects of the development standards. We can obviously go anywhere else in the ordinance that you guys wish to go, but I figured I'd start there and focus on that part. To me, the core piece of that is something we're carrying over from the existing zoning ordinance. And that's the minimum percentage of canopy cover that's required in each district. That standard comes directly from the state. The state basically adopted a code that enables cities, counties, towns within the state of Virginia to adopt a set of rules relative to minimum canopy cover associated with development. And we've set our standards at the maximum allowed by the state. We're gonna keep digging into that and see where there might be opportunities for tweaking these numbers if we can, but the state has kind of carved out that area and said, this is what you're allowed to do. But what we're trying to do is push the envelope a little bit and see where else can we institute standards and requirements that lead to more trees associated with development projects in the city. So there's a number of different places where we've done that. One is with the transitions that I was talking about. Basically, the transitions say between a higher intensity use and a lower intensity use, there has to be some form of transition that kind of moderates that those density levels between the two uses. And we're saying that has done with 3 tools: space, step backs on the buildings, which basically means that as a building goes up, the building also has to step back away from the property line, and then significantly landscaping and trees. So we're requiring trees as part of those transitions. Then in parking lots, we're establishing a requirement for trees within the interior landscaping of all parking lots. And then finally, streetscape standards, which are proposing that where a development is required to provide us with new sidewalks and streetscape, that be defined as including a green zone where trees would be planted, and then the pedestrian zone. And then further, in order to create space, right? Because one of our challenges is that our right-of-ways are often narrow and don't have the space for these facilities, which is one of the concerns we run into over and over again. That this streetscape requirement basically it encompasses whatever space is available within the city's right-of-way, and then it extends into the private property. And then the setback picks up from the edge of sidewalk, not from the edge of property. That's a significant point, and is one of the places where, frankly, we're really pushing the envelope in terms of what we're allowed to do. Hopefully, we continue to carry that through the review process with our attorneys. But what I like about it is it's creating the additional space we need to get to the streetscape that we want to achieve in the city. And then I think the other kind of significant piece, which is a change or a modification from what we currently do. Currently, the city does require that if you're taking down trees over 15 inches in caliper, that you submit a site plan. The reality is that we don't really carry that forward because it's a big ask for the average homeowner to submit a site plan associated with a tree removal. So what we're doing instead is a tree removal permit, which I think will actually up our compliance and allow us to more readily enforce all of the rules that we have around tree requirements associated with properties in the city.
So that would be a contractor who would have to apply for a permit.
Or
To
the
do a
property owner, but
removal
yeah, it would presumably, I would imagine like our other permitting functions, usually the contractor does do that. Not required to be the one who does it. It can often be the homeowner who does it themselves.
Right.
But
Who may or
contractors
may
usually
not
offer
know,
that service.
right, or may or may not know the requirement.
Right,
Because there's
exactly,
certainly a lot of people who do a lot of work in the city of Charlottesville that is not permitted.
right.
So I think it's good to have that requirement be required of somebody who actually has an obligation to make sure that that's filed.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And-
And if we can open questions up.
Yep.
Vicky, who's chair of our codes committee.
Am I understanding correctly that the tree removal permit applies to existing housing as well as new construction and new development?
That is our intention, yes.
Uh-huh. Excellent, thanks.
Kareem,
I had can you guys hear me?
you're a little quiet.
I'll see if, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
This question is more for the tree commission. I asked this of Mr. James at the planning commission meeting, and it was about the 15-inch requirement. And there's seems to be some, we could tweak that, and I was gonna throw it out there, like what, if you guys know of any examples of what a good number would be that's not cumbersome for every homeowner who wants to take down like a shrub, but also good enough to kind of keep our trees, because 15 inches is a pretty big tree. So we might want to reduce it. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there to people that know more than me.
That's a good question,
Yeah,
Steve.
Kareem, I appreciate you asking the question because yeah, 15 is what the current ordinance says, but I'm not sure there's any magic to that number.
And as far as I know, it's not a state mandated. It's like our own, we control it.
Right.
So are we talking 15 inches diameter? Or I mean, I think it mentions caliper,
Yep,
which is measured, that's usually more of a nursery term. That measures kind of the root ball or just above where the stem is above the ground.
Yeah,
Or are we
usually
talking about circumference?
you take the caliper measurer, right, and you set it on the ground and then you rotate it and measure the caliper inch at that elevation versus the diameter at breast height, which is what you're talking about, Steve, the DBH.
Right, I'm just making sure we
Yeah.
what we know what we're talking about, because it's going to be significant. The diameter is going to be significantly larger way at the bottom. And then there's also a lot of different ways to measure trees if we're talking about diameter at breast height. So
Well,
that's
I'm open to suggestions on this issue. I'm certainly not an expert in this. We carried forward the measurement in the existing ordinance, but it's anything that offers greater clarity is going to be important as we move into enforcement, right? Because you can imagine us out there having a conversation with somebody who's just taken down a tree and talking to them about the zoning violation we've got to go through, and that'll be an argument around, was it 14 or 15 calipers?
right. And so I guess my next question kind of deals with a situation like that. If somebody had cut down a tree and there was not a permit and there wasn't any real justification for it, and we were going to be assigning some sort of a retribution, a punishment. I think now, if you were to cut down a heritage tree or some sort of preserved tree, there's an automatic $2,500 fine. I've seen other cities that actually attach, like a fee associated with inches per caliper. Or there's a lot of different ways to apply that. Do you think we would be sticking with a $2,500 flat fee, or how might that be applied?
I mean, at this point, it's under the zoning ordinance, so I'm gonna say that our starting point is it's a zoning violation, which is $300 a day. That the violation persists. Now, when you take down a tree, you can't put it back unless you know something different than I do. So, we would need to, there would need to be a remedy of some form. Probably,
Yeah.
we actually, in fact, the answer would be they'd have to replant it according to the standards of what they violated, right? So that it would be whatever zoning fine we ended up levying, and we have discretion in that, but it's basically $300 a day until the issue is remedied, and then they would have to follow the code and bring the site back into compliance.
Tim had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I was to this point about once a tree is down, you can't fix it. Picking up on that, I'm encouraging the penalty or the fine to reflect the fact that you cannot purchase a 14 or 15 or whatever inch diameter tree. It's an investment you have to make and then wait years and years and years until you get the same environmental or ecosystem service and public health benefit. So I don't have a number to recommend today, but just the idea that these are a resource that cannot just be easily replaced one-to-one. So can there be a stronger incentive to really actually comply with these, tree removal permit requirements and other site planning, standards?
Vicky, yes.
I'm wondering if it would be possible to determine the value of the tree that was taken down and have a fund for tree planting that money would have to be paid into.
For example, like Washington, D.C., I know other counties in Northern Virginia, they do it by the circumference inch. So for every inch circumference, it's a $200 fine. And if you're talking about a 40-inch diameter tree, that just turned into a $20,000 tree. So something substantial is kind of what we're hoping to suggest, and I guess, would code need to be changed? Like, how would we go about changing something?
I mean, the big question there I have is what we can do under zoning and what can we do under other ordinances, right? Steve, you and I have talked a lot about Arlington's tree ordinance, which they have the heritage specimen tree section, and then they have a street tree section in particular. I shouldn't say a street tree, it's all public trees, right? Because it's street trees as well as public trees, where to remove, they've basically already kind of blanket pre-approved all of those as protected trees. You have to get through the city manager's office to take one of them down, and I believe those have the fines associated with them. If there are other examples, because I've been pushing our outside legal counsel on where are the opportunities and what are the things we can do around trees, and I'm not getting a lot back because the state legislature is so kind of hemmed us in on the issue. But if there are examples of other communities that you can share with me, that's in Virginia, that are subject to the same body of rules that we are, that's really valuable. The other complicating factor is that we're not a Chesapeake Bay community.
Yeah.
And that they have some greater authorities than we do on trees and tree preservation, particularly within those buffer areas. And I can talk about some of the things that we're talking about here around buffers, but we'll finish this conversation and come back to that.
Well, so is there going to be what I'm getting from this is there'll be a very different approach to somebody like a landowner that has private property that cut a tree down without a permit versus a street tree that's protected under a blanket ordinance.
Unless we can find an example of another community that has kind of found a pathway.
Got it.
So that, like, I've read all of Arlington's material because a lot of people have recommended Arlington to me as an example. And Arlington just released a first draft, or I don't know if it's a first draft, but a draft of their new what is it called? Forest and Natural Resource Plan or something like that. I started reading it, I forget when, this weekend or something. It's good.
Which covers all areas, like not just public lands and or
Yeah.
street right of ways. It's like the area of the city.
Yeah, it's the entire county, and it's but it's coordinated with all the other efforts that they're engaged in right now, right? Because so Arlington passed an ordinance, their missing middle ordinance amendments that just made residential development up to 6 units on a lot by right. And their effort is coordinating across. They're doing a very good job of coordinating across the different issues and the different objectives that they're trying to solve for.
So whereas there are established rules about like not dumping pollutants into storm sewers, similarly, we have standards about, or we should have standards about tree cover within our various neighborhoods, and that you could be penalized if you take out a tree indiscriminately without a permit. And that permit, you're saying, James, might cover things like the tree is infested with emerald ash borer, or
Right.
it's diseased and will not survive, et cetera. So the things like that would be covered under this permitting process, where you would basically say, I have to take this tree out.
Yeah. I have to be careful here because I'm bound by zoning.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like I don't know exactly how it's gonna play out in every instance, because what we're really checking for is zoning compliance, right? Are you taking out that tree and then taking your property out of compliance with one of the rules of the zoning ordinance? That's what we're looking for. And so, now, if you have emerald ash borer, then yeah, that I think we would consider that a mitigating factor, allow the tree removal, but there would be an expectation that something was done to replace that tree to bring it back into compliance.
Right.
But but the flip side of that is it doesn't put us in a place to necessarily like if somebody is well over compliance in terms of their canopy coverage, potentially they could get that permit to remove a tree and not necessarily have a good reason for it.
Right.
Now, the tricky thing there is we have this provision that was in the existing zoning ordinance that we're carrying forward that is a little loosey-goosey, and that's the preservation of existing landscape features, which seems to give us a great deal of authority.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we've used this in the past. And that's something that we need to talk about on our side. We're carrying it forward because it's got a lot of value in what it says, but I don't know how it's been applied and whether we've ever been challenged in the use of it.
Okay. Holly, I think I saw your hand up first.
Yes, I was curious. You just said that we are not a Chesapeake Bay city, and I'm curious how that is.
So the Chesapeake Bay Act is a state law that established that all communities essentially east of 95 are Chesapeake Bay communities, and they're required and under state oversight to adopt a buffer ordinance that's pretty specific in what it's required, what you have to then require and enforce at the local level. The option exists for all localities in the state to voluntarily become a Chesapeake Bay community. And then that law also creates what's interesting about the law, what I find interesting about the law is it basically says any community in the state can become a Chesapeake Bay community, but that subjects you to a lot of state oversight And I think that's why I don't think any community west of 95 has ever voluntarily jumped in. But it also has a provision in it that allows any locality to simply adopt a set of a buffer ordinance that's not as stringent and is not subject to state oversight. And that a number of communities, including Albemarle County and us, have taken advantage of. Our current buffer ordinance only covers 3 waterways in the city: the Ravenna, Meadow Creek, and Moores Creek. And one of the conversations we're having is, what would a buffer ordinance that encompassed more or all of our waterways look like? And we're exploring that, starting to explore that idea.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mikesha?
Thank you. Hi, James. Thanks for being here. I was at the joint session, so it's nice to hear this a second time. My question is actually, I've been also sort of tracking these references to Arlington and just trying to sort of cross-reference, if not also fact check, like some of the ways that Arlington gets brought up. And one of the things that I don't see on the Arlington tree protection language is like any real clarity around what the fines are. I do see 2,500 is what the fines can't exceed, but what it actually looks like to be fined, and or whether those fines are the same for individuals versus for businesses. I'm just wondering about thoughts on any of those pieces and or literal reference points.
I suspect we'd have to actually reach out and talk to somebody and get a sense of how they actually implement the program. So the fine is defined as up to 2,500, and discretion is vested in somebody to decide in any particular instance what fine to actually levy. So, Steve, I don't know. Whoop, where did you go?
Steve is the Seville Communications, I think.
Got him.
He becomes, yeah.
Steve, have you ever spoken with anybody who's involved in the enforcement side of the tree ordinance in Arlington?
You're on mute.
I've spoken with the arborist, who has a army of urban foresters that inspect all of the jobs that are going on. So they catch it pretty quick. We just don't have inspectors. We don't have those resources. But they're effective.
Mhm. Mhm.
And do
So
they?
I think
Does the arborist, he or she the one who's making decisions about the fines levied where a violation occurs?
I think in some instances, I think in some of the probably the more expensive ones, I think it can go to a council level. Don't quote me on that, but I know also too in Arlington, and from what I understand, and again, don't quote me on this, but I think they also have stop work orders. So as far as development goes, that's got some teeth.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I think that's with the arborists.
Mhm.
And we don't have that here.
When fines are levied, do they end up in a general fund, or is it possible to earmark those for a specific fund, like a tree fund, for instance, if it is a tree violation?
I think in Arlington, and then in a lot of the other cities I've been researching, there is a specialized tree fund, and they also promote actually kind of transplanting trees, even big, enormous trees. They'll do. I know Austin, Texas, is kind of has a couple of interesting videos of that, and they've got an outstanding tree ordinance. You get a chance to check that out. But they kind of have a replant or transplant, or kind of move monies towards this fund to plant more trees. That's kind of how they promote it.
Now, Steve, we do have, under the zoning ordinance, we do have stop work order authority. And relatively simple thing to report a violation to our zoning people and then have them issue a stop work.
To David
that's
Frazier
something-
could.
What's that?
So that would be with Dave Frazier.
No, that would be with Reed Broadhead and Craig Fabio. So
So,
David might also have stop work authority, but his would be derived, I don't know what his authorities are, but his would be derived from the ENS and stormwater ordinances.
so
I mean-
in general, we've talked about penalties and fines being levied and other things. Are there incentives built into these new zoning rewrites that help, sort of make it easier for people to say, well, the better decision here is to preserve this particular 15-inch plus caliper tree rather than cutting it down?
I mean, I think we don't have a explicitly written incentive, but what I would note is the flexibility within the ordinance at various places does create some incentives. For example, we're trying to this will come out in the administration section, but trying to create some flexibility in setback standards where the zoning administrator will be able to vary the setback in small ways. But say I need to, my setback lands somewhere in this, could it be side, rear, or front. If I can move it a certain amount, that might free up and create an opportunity for me to save a tree, right? The other big piece of flexibility in this is the notion of not having a minimum parking requirement, right?
Right.
Now, I'm not gonna say, my anticipation is most developers at all scales within the city are gonna provide on-site parking, because I think that's the nature of the city where we are today. But at least by us taking the mandate out of play, that flexibility is there, and somebody can say, hey, I'm gonna not put a driveway in here, and that creates an opportunity for me to save a tree.
And
mean,
then Steve, in terms of saving trees, as we know, defining the proper critical root zone and even defining the structural root zone, that zone within which you do development, you're really going to compromise the ability for that tree to stand up and to be viable into the future. So is that clearly defined in the ordinance structure?
It's in the ordinance, it's the BMP is what's referenced.
Yeah,
And
we
James, correct me
reference,
if I'm wrong.
we actually are specifically referencing in the ordinance, the, what's it called? The
Standards manual.
Well, the standards and design manual, and then I think we also pulled in directly some guidebook specifically related to trees in the city and referenced it specifically. Hold on, let me see if I can find that.
So does that does that become then, it's not just a reference, it becomes part of the zoning
Yeah,
ordinance? How does that get incorporated? Like, because that could change, right?
Yeah.
Or it gets modified.
so for one thing, we've said all plant material must conform to the master tree list, master shrub list, wherever those exist. So we're referencing the standards and design manual. I know this is actually a section I would love Steve to have your eyes on at some point, but we've got plant material must be installed according to the specifications of the Standards and Design Manual, the Virginia Nurseryman's Association, the Virginia Society of Landscape Designers, and Virginia chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects. But that's about installation. I could have sworn that there was another place. We've got a definition of how to measure caliper in here, actually. I forgot that this was in here when we were talking about it earlier.
That's
Steve
often
mentioned-
used as I think Steve mentioned for proposed trees for plantings. It
Okay,
would be good to have something that then establishes how you do that for an existing tree.
that would be helpful to have, yeah.
So if we are going to be kind of referencing these and they are put into the code, like for example, the BMP mentions using fencing, but it doesn't necessarily say what kind of fencing. If we wanted to put in there that we wanted 5-foot tall chain link fence instead of the orange plastic stuff that people move,
Exactly. Yeah.
could we get that amended?
I'm sorry, I was looking for the reference that I was looking for earlier and I found
I'm
it.
sorry.
For existing trees to count towards preservation requirements, tree protection details from Charlottesville best management practices for tree preservation, transplanting, removal, and replacement must be followed. So by putting that in the zoning ordinance, we are essentially codifying those requirements.
Okay.
All right.
What would it take? Because we've changed the master tree list, right? I mean, that evolves periodically and will probably evolve again as we
Yep.
discuss warming and, other things. So is it like a live reference? I don't know exactly what I'm asking.
Yeah,
but like-
it can be a live reference, yes.
Okay,
So the zoning ordinance is a little more carved in stone, right? Because it's an act of the legislative body, act of city council to make changes to it. But these reference documents aren't subject to that same requirement.
Okay, so if we wanted to say specifically in the reference documents, in this case, the BMPs, we could specify exactly what kind of fence is acceptable and what is not.
Right.
That's how we do that. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Susan?
Yeah, we've been talking about properties where there are owners and established trees. What about, I don't quite understand how all this fits into proposed development and at what point the assessment and who does the assessment of the landscape that's going to be developed and who decides what trees are trees that I mean, how does that need to be preserved on that piece of land and what trees can be cut? Or, I mean, how does that all happen in terms of new developments?
So a new development is subject, it has to submit what's called a site plan as part of their development review process. And that's that plan, that document is what we use to determine compliance with the zoning ordinance in total, right? So we receive we receive a set of plans, and those plans are reviewed to ensure that every aspect of the zoning ordinance, as well as our standards and design manual, everything else is being followed according to the rules, or is proposed to be followed. So before you can do a development project, you have to submit a plan, and that plan is reviewed. And then we have inspectors that monitor the development as it's happening to ensure that they're following the plans that have been approved.
And is it the case that everything's being clear cut right now because there are no provisions in place that are being, I mean, because now, I mean, I think of the preliminary plans for Zero High Street or for Azalea Springs. I mean, there was no kind of independent assessment about what was there and what is there and what should be preserved or not. So I'm wondering how that's going to get put in place and implemented.
Right, so if we take an example like that, so that plan set is under review, right? They just received comments back on their
Yes,
third
I understand.
submittal, right? And I mean, right now, our language is not terribly strong.
Well, that's what I'm wondering is in the new language that's being put in place, what's the strength of that in terms of these new developments and how they are assessed before anything starts? In terms of what trees should be preserved on those pieces of property and
Right.
And who decides?
So we have from the state, what the state allows us to do is that tree canopy requirement. And the tree canopy requirement under the state's, how the state has set up that code provision, they've said that we can encourage tree preservation, but we can't mandate it under that code section. So what they've offered in terms of the encouragement we're allowed to use is we're allowed to reduce the total amount of tree canopy cover at, I think it's we have it at 10 years. So so basically, here it is, where existing trees are preserved on the project site, a tree canopy bonus will be granted as follows, and it basically says, based on preservation of those trees, you can reduce your overall tree canopy. So that's what the
And that's a
state has given us to work with.
That's a proposed tree canopy, James. That's Susan, that's the important part
Yes.
about that to understand is that it's like, it's proposed plantings and then where they'll grow to within a certain period of time. And it's a 10-year period of time where you say X tree is going to get this large in 10 years, and therefore it meets this canopy requirement. So ideally, somebody chooses to preserve canopy versus proposing new canopy with plantings, because as we all know, there are various things that prevent trees from growing to their ideal size.
Right.
It can be, soils, it can be how they're maintained, et cetera. So ideally, more preservation, but maybe part of your question is like, how are we incentivizing that preservation? And
Yeah, I guess, are you saying because the state sort of hems us in terms of what we can do, then the only thing to do is to incentivize that? Is that right? Because, I mean, it just seems like we're giving away mature forests, and we will never get those back, as somebody said earlier. With the percentage of trees that is they have to replace it with. So maybe the question is, how do we incentivize the preservation of mature trees on a site such that it is effective? I don't know.
that's a good question.
Right.
Jean?
Yes, I was wondering if you could direct me to where it talks about runoff with all of the extra built structures and roofs. That's all I see is all of these extra roofs and sometimes extra parking spaces on a lot in addition to buildings. When someone determines that, okay, you want to plant this tree or preserve this tree, and in 10 years it will be 10% or 20%, whatever is needed, do they also calculate how much soil is needed and whether the soil will be inundated by extra runoff because it's running off all of these extra roofs?
So all I know is that in terms of our review, we are reviewing according to that best management practices document we were just talking about. So if that had some language in it relative to the direction of runoff, excuse me, relative to preserving existing trees, that's where I would look to. Now, on the larger issue of stormwater management, we are, as the local government, we're enforcing the state stormwater management ordinance, which is chapter 10 of the city ordinances. And so that's where you asked the question where to look in terms of stormwater management. That's where you'll find it in chapter 10.
Since we are running up on 6 o'clock and we have other agenda items, this is a great discussion. I'm wondering if maybe somebody would like to make a motion to review the BMP within committee and commit to having something to talk about in our next meeting. It seems like we have some potential there. Steve could review for diameter breast height to make sure that we're clear about that language, critical root zones. I know this has been done in the past, but it's always worth putting another eye to things like this, especially as it becomes a reference document to these zoning changes.
Sounds reasonable.
Vicky? Didn't hear you.
Okay, I move to create a subcommittee to review the BMPs and make proposals to discuss at the next meeting.
Somebody like to Second that,
Second.
Donna seconds. So we will move to place that particular motion in a subcommittee to review next meeting.
Mhm.
I think, do I still vote on that? We should vote on that. Yeah, all in favor of that motion being committed to a subcommittee?
Aye.
Excellent. All in aye. All in opposition? None. Okay, so moved. Excellent. Well, that's great. James, thank you for joining us tonight. That was very helpful.
Um,
I'm sure you'll hear some more from our codes committee. Vicky, do you have
Right.
something else? Yep.
Yeah, I want to bring something up before James leaves. I
Mhm.
think we have some attendees on this meeting who are here because of your presentation. And I wonder if they want to make any comments or ask any questions before you leave.
Yeah.
With that.
Okay, excellent. Steve, is it possible to open to attendees? I know we have Keith Pitchford and Molly Murphy, and then that's Peggy Van Yeris who's the observer. And Peggy has her hand up.
Yeah, Peggy, you're on.
Hi, Peggy.
You can't get away from me so easily.
Love it.
I'm just writing you an email to send you the BMP. It's a pretty good document. It really is. It's got good tree protection details and plans. It has tree replacement requirements, which I think you ought to look at it, see if you think it's enough. It has tree planting details. It calls for an ISA certified arborist to do the plan. So it's pretty strict. We haven't been, I mean, as James knows, we haven't been enforcing it. But, you know, it looks like that's what he wants to do. So anyway, so I was excited to hear that, and I was going to send it to you. The other thing was, really quickly, and then I'll be quiet. James, I talked with the arborist in Richmond, a couple of years ago, and it's my understanding that they have penalties for people who basically remove public trees, even if they're allowed to do it in a site plan. And they do it inch by inch, and I'm not, and the arborist decides how much the value of the tree. So I'm having a hard time finding the ordinance, but I would suggest you talk to somebody in Richmond and see what they do, because I think they're pretty strict about it. And the money goes into a tree planting plan. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Steve, do you have contacts there?
I do. I've looked at their ordinance, and I think theirs is associated with how many inches circumference. So it adds up very quickly. You're talking about a really big, like 40, 50 inch tree, $300 an inch, like circumference, not diameter, circumference. That's an expensive mistake. So yes, there's some pretty creative approaches here.
Excellent, because we know
But again,
ecosystem services offered by that tree.
So
Hard to put a dollar amount on that, but we should.
as we've kind of well covered, I've read the Arlington ordinance. Can you, Steve, if you can track down the Richmond one, can you send it to me and we can talk about that one?
Sure, I can send you a couple. Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
And
Thank you.
So actually, the codes committee met yesterday. We came up with 4 questions, and I think we really only got to one. And I know we have to move on. Is there any way that we could maybe email you a set of questions, and maybe you and I could talk about it? Okay, that'd be great. All right, thank you, James.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, James. Good night.
Good night.
So next on our agenda is recent activities. Steve, is that something you want to share?
Yeah, let me find that again. Okay, so Parks and Rec did meet with Piedmont Housing Alliance as well as Public Works. This was maybe 2 weeks ago. We're still kind of working on how we're going to mitigate the trees on Garrett Street and 2nd Street. We are, for the most part, waiting for Piedmont Housing to submit their site plans, or at least their schematics for how they're going to do this. So it's complicated because the project's in 4 different phases. right now we're in phase 1 and 2, and so that's kind of the Garrett Street side. And as it appears, I don't see how we're going to get out of losing at least 2 of those trees on Garrett Street. I should have a aerial photo up, but at any rate, they are extending 4th Street pretty much right through the middle of the development. And these 2 trees are pretty much right in the path of that, where the street's going through. And the root systems are going to be compromised. I don't see how we're going to get around that. 2nd Street, on the other hand, doesn't have any utilities tied to it. There's really no reason why they can't figure out a pretty creative way. And this is just my take on it. But right now, they don't have too many obstacles in keeping those trees. They should be able to figure that out. NDS this is new for them, and they don't know exactly how to do it. And actually, we've talked about the BMP often tonight. The BMP, it says very clearly, you go under the trees. You drill way under the trees, and you go as far into the root system as you possibly can, and you just don't touch the root system. And I actually mentioned that to
Directional
James.
boring approach. Mhm.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did not get any comment back from NDS. And then the other, as far as the Garrett Street side, they still they have a number of utilities, electric and whatnot, underneath the sidewalk on Garrett Street. I don't know if anybody's been on Garrett Street recently, but the sidewalk's actually a disaster. It is not ADA compliant, and there's a lot that needs to go into making that sidewalk up to snuff. And so what they're proposing is that they have to pull up the sidewalk and while they pull up the sidewalk, they will maintain the utilities and reuse the utilities. And what I've been promoting is fix the sidewalk as best you can without ripping the sidewalk up. Because if they rip it up and they replace it, they're going to kill the trees.
Mhm.
Hey, Jeff, you can weigh in if you want.
Yeah.
That's not going to go well for the trees. So abandon the utilities and do whatever you do on 2nd Street on Garrett Street. Just drill under them, find another way. It says in your BMP you can do it,
Mhm.
figure it out. That's kind of my stance and what Parks and Rec is going to come back with.
Mhm.
A lot of this is going to depend on what Dominion Power has to say about it. And it's going to be difficult to get them to the table. It's going to be somebody at probably the Sam Sanders or the mayor level that actually gets them to the table
Mhm.
to discuss.
Mhm.
But at any rate, so that's kind of an
Good. Do we understand how Dominion makes its decisions around directional boring and burying of power? Because that's certainly happening within various neighborhoods in Charlottesville. I don't know if it has to do with existing tree canopy, and so the cost of them coming through and trimming and/or power outages and, having to deal with that tips the balance, and they say, well, we're going to just put it underground.
I don't know when that balance gets tipped.
Mhm.
That's a good question. This is still kind of new for me, so I don't know. I haven't figured that out.
Right. And so if they
But
did, what Dominion would have to pay a hefty fine if they did end up killing those trees because they had to bury their power.
I don't know how that would work.
Pony up some money. Get
I don't
them to
know how.
pay into a tree fund.
Maybe. It's going to be a process, and the Dominion has not weighed in at all.
Yeah.
So the battle for the Garrett Street and 2nd Street trees continues. We'll keep you posted on that.
Okay.
So obviously Module 2 was presented to council last week. Something kind of interesting, I don't know, Holly's might appreciate this as well. The city actually did its first controlled burn in Charlottesville last week. There's a little postage stamp near UVA, but we got full support from Department of Forestry and the Charlottesville Fire Department. And they seem, so we seem like we're on our way to hopefully do more in that regard. But for some of the things that I've been working on, it was a victory for sure. So I thought I'd throw that in there.
Congratulations, Holly.
I just have a quick aside. Do you know part of Meadow Creek burned? I was curious. I don't think that was on purpose, was it? Do you know anything about that, Steve?
Where on Meadow Creek?
Kind of behind Mekki Drive.
I don't know.
Okay, it looks fine. It
Uh,
looks good.
Probably needed it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Next is committee reports. We can lead off with Jean, Education and Advocacy. Oh, and
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
On Earth Day, April 22nd, we'll be tabling and giving away 100 Eastern Redbud seedlings. We're doing this in partnership with two groups. One is the Seville Committee for Peace and Justice, and that'll be on the downtown mall from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the second group is the Seville Citizens Climate Lobby at X Parks Farmers Market from 9 a.m. to noon. We are looking for volunteers for 2-hour stints. We have some people from the Seville area tree stewards who are volunteering, but we need more people to just put in. If you can put in 2 hours, you guys are the experts. That's who we need, talking, people who really know about trees, talking to people about what is the situation of the tree canopy, what needs to be done, what they can do. We created a new flyer explaining the tree canopy situation and ways people can help, the way they can call and email and get involved. So that's the second thing we've done. We'll be handing that out along with the seedlings. I would like to take that 8.5 by 10 flyer and make it into a full poster, which is good for tabling. If anyone has the technology and the knowledge to do that, let me know. That's beyond my my ability. Although I haven't looked into it yet, but I've never done before. We established a new email address where people can get more information about donating, volunteering, or adopting trees. We've set up a mailing list on MailChimp in order to send out alerts. So I'm hoping that the various committees will send me alerts that they'd like the public to know about. Our new partnership is with CCL, the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is, they have both two federal designations. One is a nonprofit organization, one is lobbying. And they work all across the United States. Their new, the reason we're partnering with them is because they have a new Healthy Forests initiative that just started. And its members, then they have training both in lobbying, and it's, by the way, it's nonpartisan. You can get training in how to talk to people on the right, how to talk to people on the left. They've got some really good programs. So, but they're also write letters to the editor and so forth. So this is a good organization for helping us get the word out about trees in Charlottesville. They are creating, or in the process of creating, a petition to City Council that incorporates the Code Committee's recommendations concerning the zoning rewrite, plus other recommendations. And Vicky's in touch with their leaders. I'm not sure if you've seen the latest version of the petition, but that's ongoing. We haven't started doing, but to do on our to-do list is to establish a tree fund to enable low-income residents to plant and care for trees, whether it should be specified that or broader, just a tree planting fund, tree fund. Anyone, you're welcome, anyone who wants to work on that. Set up an Adopt a Tree program whereby businesses, organizations, or citizens can provide funds and or labor for individual trees or groups of trees. And lastly, review the Commission's current system of performance measures, including climate data, to determine if it provides enough information to evaluate if progress is being made toward the goal of 50% tree canopy and by what year. Anyone who likes to tackle that kind of project, please let me know. It's going to take a committee of people to do that. And I think lastly, we could really use UVA interns for these three kinds of projects. And so I know that the third person who's a new member is coming in and works with UVA and the biophilic organization. And I'm going to talk to him about whether we can start talking about how to get UVA interns who could just really get a hold of some of these more complicated projects and get going. So let me know if you have any interest in working on any of these things.
Jean? Mhm. A lot of good stuff. Arbor Committee? Acacia's.
Yeah, hey, good evening, all. Acacia had to head out early, so I'll just give a quick update. And the main thing that we're working on currently is just putting together, continuing to put together some ideas in regards to some social media blasts as far as the tree nomination process goes. Still kind of working on that. And question I think that we had for Steve was, who do you know offhand who handles the social media account? Would you send whatever we kind of finalized to Nathan Newell, or is there like another specific social media manager? Do you know kind of what the general process would be there?
Yes, we have, her name is Veronica Torres, and she's very good, and whatever you were interested in putting out, I would pass along, definitely.
Cool. So we're talking like the city's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, kind of cross platform.
Yes, and it pretty much, it's got a pretty long reach, but it's mostly people that, I would say the majority of it is the same people that receive kind of the events calendars and that sort of thing, like the summer camp schedules. So it goes pretty far.
Cool.
So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're still gonna work through on that. I know last meeting you had mentioned that you were or it may have been through some email correspondence in regards to the question on the memorial tree and some memorial tree designation. Do we have any more clarity on that regarding like the legal process if there's a sale, or city responsibility as far as the maintenance planting is concerned?
No one volunteered any help on that front.
Gotcha.
It would probably the best way to do it would be to figure out what other cities are doing, and then kind of bring that approach in. I did talk to a couple of lawyers outside of the city and outside of the normal channels, and they were pretty amazed at how difficult something like this would be. So the best approach is to figure out what other cities have done that made it successful in the past.
Does Richmond or Arlington or some of these other kind of token ordinances have anything related, or should we look elsewhere?
They have the same category of preservation, but I don't know if I don't have any way to figure out like how that carries over, if it would survive a land transfer or not. Because if you think about it, that's a pretty big deal. And so, yeah, it'd be a sensitive issue.
Yeah. Okay.
But that would.
Yeah, thank you.
I haven't had time to look and really investigate that, but that would be worth knowing. Absolutely.
Gotcha. Yeah, cool. So yeah, other than that, the city website, and I don't know if this is kind of more for like a chair, vice chair issue, Jeff, or if it's something that we could potentially kind of shepherd along as part of the Arbor subcommittee. But in email correspondence over the last month, there's the bullet point of adding the 2022 State of the Forest report to the city's webpage. Adding the most recent nominations from last month to the green map, adding new members. So there's a list of items that as the tree commission as a whole needs added or some revisions to what there is now. I mean, I can put together like an email to send you, Steve, to forward along, or we can work together to kind of finalize what needs to be done for that. I don't know what Jeff would think, that just to kind of keep that as a subcommittee thing and kind of work with Steve for that, or
I think that makes sense.
okay.
Steve, would it make sense to an email or a phone call? What works best with?
An email would probably be good. And, it also occurs to me too, and I talked briefly with Robin Haynes at Charlottesville Area Tree Stewards about, this kind of goes back to I guess somewhere along the same lines as memorial trees, but they've designated a number of trees as notable trees, and that's actually on our website. But getting those as heritage or some sort of a preservation status, because really it's just a status. There's no preservation associated with that. Whatever you want to call it. But
yeah, that's something we can definitely look at and work to get those actually designated.
So cats
in one of the city categories.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking
Yeah.
about, Steve. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Which gives it more teeth.
I mean, I talked to Robin Haynes briefly about it, and she knew who some of the landowners were. She suspected some of them might be okay with it, and some of them definitely would not be okay with it.
Yeah.
But I don't think they really wanted to actually be the people that knocked on the door and talked about it. So
I know one of those families. I think they could be game. I think tech professors come up every year or so and check it out and evaluate itself and feed it and do other things.
but it would be a good way to get more trees nominated. So
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, I think that's it on our end. Donna, do you have anything that you'd like to add before we move on?
No, I think that's covered it, although I'm not sure when we find out where our new members, which committees they're going to be on, because we could, use a fourth person. So just putting in a plug for Arbor Committee.
Yeah, when do we establish that? Because I'm going to send an email to you, Susan, and Tyler and JD about getting you oriented to our teams. Teams holders, I guess, is what they are. But basically, you get an invite from the city, and we've got a bunch of folders on a team's website that has like orientation materials and then information from the past several years about the work that the commission has been up to. So we want to do that, and then maybe once you've reviewed that, and that defines what the committees do and what their responsibilities are throughout the year, you could then, put a plug in for whatever one you would like to be on.
Right.
Oh, I have one other thing too. So our plan at this point is we're going to create some social media posts, some draft ones, and then probably bring them to the next meeting so that we can then move forward to getting them out in terms of recruiting more trees to be nominated. So that's our goal.
Great. Okay, thank you, Jeff. Donna? Vicky? Codes and practices?
Okay, well, y'all heard James Freeze. That's what we're working on. And we'll be writing up comments on module 2 to submit. And I guess now we're also going to be reviewing the BMPs.
Excellent. The module 2 that you can access on the website through that link that I think Steve sent. It's the Division 34 development standards. Is that correct? And then it has a series of divisions.
Well,
4.1, or is it specifically to that, or is it the whole thing?
It's a big document.
Yeah.
There's a couple of kind of points in there that we're probably going to be honing in on, like the preservation fencing. That's going to be a big one, and one that I'm really pushing for is that when the developers submit their site plans, that all the trees and all the tree preservation measurements are drawn to scale. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, when they
Mm.
submit their site plans, they get on site, they're like, oh, well, I didn't realize the tree preservation fence is gonna get me so close to the boundary now. I can't do it. Or I didn't figure out how to get my equipment in and out, that sort of thing. So that I don't know is in the BMPs. So there's some things we need to suggest. And I'm glad that James kind of alluded to that this is a living document that's going to be changed.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. Let's
So
let's
yeah,
get
that
it.
was
Let's
great.
get it full.
Yeah.
and tight. It's good. That's great. So if there are, as people review module 2, would it be okay, Vicky, to have people send you their
Yes.
reflections or comments? Okay,
Yes, absolutely.
excellent. Thank you for holding those.
Okay.
Great. So, Jean. Oh, sorry. Jean first and then Holly.
I just had a procedural question, which came up with the first code committee's comments on module 1. If I'm going to be alerting like CATS and other environmental groups that are partners to things we're putting out about this topic and others, how do I know when I get a document that it's approved for putting out to the public? And I tried to get that through emails and I wasn't successful. And so then I usually have to modify them to put them in everyday language and really abbreviate them. And I don't know what the process is for my sending my potential output to the public to make sure I'm not going to make some major error and get something wrong. So
I think I can give you a short answer for the codes committee.
Okay, great.
If a document says draft, don't share it with anybody.
Okay.
And if it's final and has been sent, I don't think we have anything that can't be shared.
Okay,
People agree with me on that?
then once I've reworded it for the public, who do I send it to for approval? Steve, are you the person I send it to saying, please approve, or any suggestions you have for revisions?
I think it would probably go to me and then I would discuss it with Jeff, and Jeff would make sense to me. I don't know.
Sounds good. And then if we need to put it to the rest of the commission, that can go out.
Okay,
Everyone. Yep.
so Steve and Jeff,
And Jeff.
right? Okay.
Can I offer a reflection, which would be, I think, to piggyback on what Vicky shared, if the codes committee works on something and we bring it, we send it and then we'll review it at a TC meeting and, typically vote on it before we want to send it to whoever it is, city council or planning commission, or put it on the website, whatever. I think, Jean, you have the ability as a citizen and advocate to say, here, I've attached what the tree commission has voted on, and put your own summary in the email body or the whatever, the blog, or, you're free to do that. But I think maybe like rewording stuff and then resending it out, it feels a little bit like, I don't know, like a spiral or something.
That's a great suggestion. So here's a reference, and then here's a executive summary, and you're welcome to do an executive summary of whatever the document is that we
Okay.
can be out in the world. That I would agree with that. Does anybody have any
Okay.
concerns relative to that? Makes sense. Okay. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Jean, for the question. Holly?
Yeah, mine's just a little bit of an aside, but I was curious if this BMP would be if it would be possible to use that to keep people from planting what we now know are invasive species. Because I know it mentions the tree list. So can we control what species they can plant with that, or would that be overreach?
Yeah, that's something I'm definitely putting in there.
Okay.
That's been discussed, yeah.
Okay.
Check out, I mean, there's some good lists out there, and most of them are also accompanied by "do not plant this." Whether or not, I mean, who enforces that, particularly on the, the shrubbier side or the grasses side? Like, I don't know that level of grasses and flowers, but but yeah, check out some of the other cities. Not just in Virginia, but I got some good ideas from Wisconsin, for example. Or Austin, Texas has a great one. Arlington has a great one. Yeah.
Cool.
It would be awesome if we weren't like impinging on the freedom of commerce. If you could go to like Lowe's and find them for, providing Andina domestica for everybody to plant. Like it just seems like, like the city could go out there and like, cease and desist order, like stop selling invasive plants. Anyway.
To that point, I want to chime in just to say that draft zoning requires that your plant palette come from the master tree list or master shrub list. So it's not like a please do this or a recommendation. It would be a legal requirement to do that. And
right.
I think we've updated the master tree list within the past like 6 to 12 months. So it's set up to be a pretty good, pretty good outcome. It's enforced and everything.
Right.
Actually, it's not. It hasn't been finalized and voted on, but I would very much like for it to be.
Oh, I must be mistaken then on that. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah, the one currently available is, it definitely doesn't say that you can't plant anything. It has strong recommendations, but the language would need to be updated. So maybe I'm missing that.
No, you're not. The one that's online now is not good. It's not terrible, but it could be. We've got a draft of I think a better list, and it's kind of broken down by canopy tree, street tree, plant under power lines, wet site. We just never actually finished it and voted on it.
What do we need?
Can we move
What do
that
we need to do to get it over that hurdle?
Yeah, can we move that to the other committee to do?
I'll send it out to everybody, and maybe and I'll also attach or someone on the Arbor Committee or Holly, since you seem to be interested, if you want to come up with a do not plant list. Yeah, let's definitely get that done. That's definitely been on my mind lately.
Okay, great.
But I think the big one was that there's so many columns. Someone needs to figure out how to format it. I think that's been the main hang up. I'm not that savvy, so yes, Gene.
They're also,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
They're predicting that in 20 years, we will be not 7A, but 9 planting zone. We'll be like Houston, Texas. I mean, unless we get our act together with climate, and it looks like we're not. So is the list considering, the list contains trees which do okay now, but also can do okay in 9?
There's been some adjustment. Like, for example, sugar maple's not on there anymore because we're at the edge of its range now. Yeah, we're not going to stay there. So yeah, just a lot of the species have been taken into account. So good point. Yes, Donna.
No, I did revise the list with the different tabs for different zones. So that was done, but then somehow that got thrown out. I mean, I still have it and somebody still has it. I definitely looked at it. So you want to use that rather than so there's a master list and then there's tabs for each type of tree. So
yes. I want to revisit. I think we should definitely revisit that for Steve's comment. Yes, thank you, Donna. Tyler, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, I mean, again, looking at that document, there are some just internal inconsistencies too, like not recommending trees like the, Washington hawthorn, but then that is a recommended tree for entrance corridors, things that,
yes,
should be maybe addressed, or even just on the not recommended list, having trees that are native, next to like the tree of heaven,
yeah,
would maybe not be ideal.
Yes,
But
yeah.
maybe that's already been addressed somewhere. So, sorry.
Well,
needs
it'd be good to have your sharp eyes on that too, as this gets then brought back to the commission to vote on.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you.
One
Okay,
more-
so,
Oh,
yep, Tim.
Real quick, Jeff, thank you. I was going to say it's exciting that we're going to take the opportunity to not just look at the zoning, but the reference documents like BMP's master tree list. I do want to point out, I think we talked about this yesterday. I can't remember. The BMP manual is referenced in the streetscape zoning section and in the tree preservation and replacement section of the zoning, but it's not referenced in the planting requirements, which seems like the worst of all three places to omit it. The planting requirement section, which is 4.8.2, it talks about the standards and design manual, which has more of like an engineering lens to it, but it does not actually reference the tree blah 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 BMPs. I don't have it memorized, excuse me. So maybe that's like one thing that we need to make sure, in addition to our detailed reflections, like that big kind of making that link explicit.
Excellent. Thank you. References. Good. Living references. I like that. Okay, great. So we're on to our just two more items on the agenda. Items and announcements not on the agenda or action items for the next meeting. Looks like there's a couple items on here. Steve, you want to touch on those?
Yeah, so just anybody's welcome to attend our Earth Day event. It's going to be at Mead Park, 10 to 12 on Saturday, April 22nd. We're working with RCA, or Rivanna Conservation Alliance, and we're planting more or less a stream restoration planting. That should be fun. We'll be mulching a bunch of trees and probably planting 10 to 12 trees. Depends on how many people show up. The Arbor Day event is going to be at McIntyre Park. If anybody knows, it's kind of down from the skate park. The giant catalpa tree is what they've chosen to recognize. It is it's a cool tree. We'll be doing that with Cats and Department of Forestry on the 28th, which I believe it is Arbor Day. I'm trying to remember what the 28th is. Arbor Day. That would have been a good thing to know. But I think it was last year. Our Arbor Day was not actually on Arbor Day.
Not the same. Yes.
No, it is Arbor Day, 28th. We're right.
Okay, good. All right, good. And then our next meeting we'll have Lisa Wittenborn from RCA, and she just got a rather large grant for dealing with invasive plants, which actually reminds me for another shout out. We did have some good support at the commission meetings lately, in the council meetings to support our cause of invasive plants. So thank you everybody for helping out with that. And it appears as though maybe, even though council did not put it in the CIP, they are considering putting it in the operational budget for urban forestry. I don't think it's necessarily been
excellent.
Okay, but I don't think it was entirely thrown out, and I think that this came together. So thank you for that.
Right.
But at any rate, Lisa will be talking more about her grant and her training programs that she's doing for the public and kind of where their target areas are. And actually, I guess since this is kind of new, it should have been included earlier, but I did apply for some funding through the Thomas Jefferson Planning Commission districts for invasives. And if that goes through, that'll be a pretty good chunk to focus on Parks and Rec's new acquisition at Azalea Springs. I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but it's on the other side of Old Lynchburg Road, and it is a disaster zone. So we are hoping to spray it and mulch it and plant it. And then there's some parts of Penn Park that I want to hit, and we'll be using that funding for this if we get it. So we'll see.
Excellent.
That's what I have.
Thank you for those items. Last here is the general public comments. I know we have Keith Pitchford and Molly Murphy on. I don't know if either of them have things that they would like to ask of the commission or make comments on. Now is the time.
This is Keith. I'll do.
Sorry, Keith, I muted you.
You were there for a second, Keith, but Steve will give you
trying
talking
to-
privileges again.
Okay, should be good. Sorry, Keith. How do I get a unmuted?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to listen in, and there's just a lot of great stuff going on. I'm very happy to participate in the BMP rewrite, the tree list rewrite. This is the time to do it, since this is our opportunity to get this in the regs and so forth. So I'm very, very happy to do that. I've been working with trees for a long time, so I have a lot of experience to draw on. And also with, Virginia's a tough one. Oh yeah, you mentioned something, Steve, about the memorial or heritage trees. And I think I made a comment to you at one point about when you nominate a tree, also nominating its critical root zone along with it, because if you don't preserve the critical root zone, the tree is not going to be with us. And if you have a lot of this infill development, then somebody next door to a heritage tree or something could build and kill your tree. So, it would be nice to also say, well, this tree has a root zone of such and such, and we want to preserve it as well. I don't know how successful you'll be legally because of the Hawaii rule that Virginia follows. But nonetheless, it would be nice to publicize that these large trees also have large root systems and that we need to protect those as well. Anyway, a lot going on. I'm happy to volunteer to help wherever on all of these things. So just let me know what you need. I'm happy to do it.
Excellent. Thank you,
we'll
Keith.
be in touch, definitely.
Okay.
Great. It doesn't look like Molly has her hand up, so I think find the agenda again. I think that's the end of the meeting. So unless there's anything else from commission members, move to adjourn tonight's meeting. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Just one thing about, I think this has come up over the winter, but interest in meeting in person. I honestly don't know what the city policy currently is, or if that's expected to change or anything. But I think I joined the Tree Commission in January 2020 and have been to a total, I think, of maybe 2 or 3 in-person meetings, and maybe a committee meeting here or there, in a coffee shop. But it would be awesome to all get together. I don't know if that's on anyone else's mind or if that's in discussion right now, Steve, but just wanted to inquire before we break.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, we'll get further down that road soon. Definitely.
Yeah. What was James's comment? He said something about it was being considered and they were moving forward potentially.
Unfortunately, that's when somehow my phone, someone called and I tried to hang up and I called 911 somehow. I don't know how, but I left. That's what happened. So I missed that part of the meeting.
Okay, well, it sounds like something is in the works potentially to get that changed.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Shall I make the motion to adjourn? I think that's the proper Robert's rules, and then we'll need a second. Second, and then all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye, aye.
Thanks to you all, and Susan and Tyler will be in touch.
Great, thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.